Hello and welcome to this webinar delivered by the ISM Trust. The ISM Trust is the Incorporated Society of Musicians' sister charity and works to ensure that all music professionals in the UK can reach their full potential. We create pioneering resources to support all those who work in music and seek to challenge, educate and inspire through webinars, seminars, events, printed and digital resources and advice packs. I am Maria Visitiu and I'm member and event manager at the ISM. And today I'm joined by Daniel Lewis for this webinar on copyright, royalties and PRS for music. This is the first in a two-part series that will help you understand your rights as a music creator, the fundamentals of copyright law and how your songs can generate royalties. Before we begin, I have a few points for you. If you experience any technical difficulties, such as sound quality issues, please let us know in the chat box and we'll attempt to resolve the issue. If you wish to use them, subtitles are available by enabling them at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM Trust website at ismtrust.org/webinars, as well as on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we will endeavour to answer as many of them as possible at the end. I'll now hand over to Daniel for the presentation and I hope you enjoy.
Thanks, Maria. Welcome everybody to this webinar on copyright, royalties and PRS for music. My name is Daniel Lewis. I'm the relationship manager for classical at PRS for music. My job entails representing the interests of our classical members, which are composers and publishers, and also spreading the word more widely about copyright and royalties, which is why I'm really happy to be speaking with you today. If you don't write classical music, don't worry at all. This webinar is going to cover all different kinds of music. Just so happens that I'm the classical person at PRS. In a nutshell, what I would like to get across today is that if you're a composer or a songwriter and your music is being used commercially, then you're entitled to royalties. To give you an idea of the content we're going to be covering today, we're first going to look at copyright and what your rights are as a music creator. We then look into the collective management organization, what that is and what that might mean for you. We then give a short introduction to PRS for music. And the second half of this webinar will go into PRS for music in more detail. So we'll look at performing and mechanical rights. These are quite important to understand. They might be relevant in different contexts, depending on when your music is used. We'll look at where the money comes from exactly, so who PRS for music's customers are. And then we'll also look at our distribution policy when it comes to our royalty payments and some key concepts there. Finally, we'll look at PRS for music membership and whether you might consider joining if you're a composer or a songwriter. At the end, we're going to have a Q&A, so please do pop into the chat any questions you have at all on any content that we cover today. Firstly, to introduce copyright. Copyright is an intellectual property right, which is set out in UK law under the Copyright Designs and Patents Act of 1988. It covers, in the first instance, original literary, musical, and artistic works. And here the definition of original, it's not an artistic or an aesthetic judgment as to how original your music is. It simply means that the work originated from you and that you used your own skill and judgment in order to create the work. So in short, that it wasn't copied. The Copyright Designs and Patents Act also covers films, sound recordings, programs, broadcasts, and typographical arrangements. So what are your rights as a composer or songwriter? Basically, you have the exclusive right to control and therefore request payment when your music is performed or recorded, broadcast or made available online, adapted or arranged, and sold or rented. A really important aspect of copyright is that it's granted automatically. So there's no need for your music to be, for example, commercially published in order for it to be copyright. It's granted to you automatically. So it's definitely worth bearing that in mind whenever somebody asks you to use your music commercially. So we know roughly what copyright is and what your rights are. How long does it last for exactly? There are three main types of copyright concerning a musical work. These are the musical composition, which is protected for 70 years from the end of the calendar year in which the creator dies. To give you an example, if you imagine the French composer Claude Debussy, he died in 1918. 70 years from then means that his work went out of copyright after 1988. And after then, his work fell into the public domain, which is a term you may have heard of. Basically means that there are no outstanding legal or copyright restrictions on that work if it's in the public domain. The next type of copyright regarding a musical work is the sound recording. This is protected for 70 years from the creation of the recording. So sticking with the Debussy example, if I were to record one of Debussy's works, that recording would stay in copyright for 70 years. So until 2092, if I created that recording today. The final type of copyright concerning a musical work is something called a typographical arrangement, which is basically how the music is laid out on a page. So in the sheet music or on the musical score, and that's protected for 25 years from the publication date. So we know roughly what copyright is and also how long it lasts. Now you might ask, how is it actually put into practice? The answer really is licensing agreements. A licensing agreement will allow a copyright owner, which is a composer or songwriter in this instance, it allows them to retain ownership of their work while granting a third party permission to use that work. So a licensing agreement will usually take the form of a contract, and on that contract, it'll specify who is licensing the work, which in this instance would be you as the composer or songwriter. It'll also outline who the licensee is, so who is the customer, the person using the music. And then there will be various details relating to the music and how it is being used. So a licensing agreement will specify what compositions are being used, how long they are being used for or played, and also what territories it applies to. And if you'd like to see some example licensing agreements or know some more, I really recommend checking out the ISM website, which has some great sample licensing agreements for composers and songwriters. I'd like you to imagine for a moment all the different ways in which music is used. So we have live performances in concert venues, gigs in pubs and clubs, radio broadcasts, TV and film, and all the different kinds of streaming. All of this represents a huge administrative undertaking when it comes to licensing. If each individual composer or songwriter had to draw up a licensing agreement for every time their music was used, they would soon run out of time. So this is the context in which the Collective Management Organization, or CMO, was created. A CMO is an organization that manages intellectual property rights, such as copyright, on behalf of rights holders. So the most common form of CMO when it comes to music is a royalty collection society, which is what PRS for music is. CMOs administer rights on behalf of songwriters or authors. CMOs also facilitate access to copyright works by responding to changes in technology and wider consumer trends. In order for them to fulfill their purpose, CMOs must be well governed and transparent, and this is achieved through codes of conduct such as the British Council's principle of good practice for collective management organizations. There is also something called the CRM directive, which was a directive published by the European Parliament in 2014. There are also global institutions which promote the interests of creators worldwide. And such an example is CSAC. That's the logo you can see in the bottom right hand of the screen. CSAC is the International Confederation of Societies of Authors and Composers. CSAC is an international, non-governmental, not-for-profit organization that promotes the rights of composers and songwriters worldwide. Basically, they set professional standards for royalty collection societies, and they also implement data systems which ensure that royalties flow to creators when their works are used anywhere in the world. CSAC has around 238 society members, which come from 121 different countries. And one such member is PRS for Music. So who are PRS for Music? We are a collective management organization, specifically a royalty collection society. And we represent the rights of approximately 155,000 members. Our members are rights holders of music compositions, which are songwriters, composers, and music publishers. And when members join PRS for Music, they assign their rights to us, and we then administer them on their behalf. We do this by issuing licenses to our customers, which include concert venues, promoters, broadcasters, digital service providers, and record labels, and many more. The resulting monies are paid to our members as royalties. PRS for Music also plays an important role in protecting the value of copyright by responding to new technologies. So an example of this is extending the use of music recognition technology to advance the way music creators are paid when their music is played in nightclubs and also festivals. We also play an important role in supporting the creation of new music. And each year we make a donation to our partner charity, the PRS Foundation, which is the UK's leading funder of new music. So anybody interested in kind of funding new music, or if you're a music creator looking for funding, I thoroughly recommend checking out the PRS Foundation website and checking out their initiatives. Now that we know who PRS for Music is and who their members are and some of their customers, I'd like to go into some more details about the structure of PRS and also introduce the concept of performing and mechanical rights. So PRS for Music is actually a brand name used to describe two different royalty collection societies. These are the Performing Rights Society, or PRS, and the Mechanical Copyright Protection Society, or MCPS. PRS was founded in 1914, and it's a private membership organization governed by its members. So we have something called a members' council, where the members are elected and they make choices as to how PRS for Music is run. MCPS was founded a little later in 1924, and it's a private organization owned by the UK Music Publishers Association. So PRS licenses something called the performing right, and MCPS licenses something called the mechanical right. Performing and mechanical rights are relevant in different contexts, and whether or not you become a member of PRS or MCPS depends on how your music is being used. To explain the performing right, I'd like you to think of performing as being communicated to the public. So the performing right is therefore relevant when your music is performed in concert venues, at gigs in pubs and clubs, also when your music is broadcast on the radio or TV, and also when streamed or downloaded. To explain the mechanical right, the best way to think of this is think of mechanical as when your music is reproduced. So music usages that relate to mechanical rights include when your music is reproduced on CDs, DVDs, and vinyl, and also when your music is broadcast on TV and radio, streamed and downloaded. You'll see that there are some common elements between the two. So for example, streams and downloads affects both the performing right and the mechanical right. So you would receive income from both of those sources in those contexts, provided you were members of PRS and MCPS, of course. There are certain rights related to music that PRS does not control, and these are print and hire, grant rights, and synchronization rights. Print and hire refers to the selling and hiring of sheet music, such as when an ensemble needs to rent a set of score and parts in order to perform a piece. So this is something more relevant to classical composers. Grant rights occur when music is performed in conjunction with a dramatic narrative. And the most common examples of this are staged works, such as opera, ballet, contemporary dance, and music theatre. A synchronization right is an additional right that comes into play when music is used with moving images, such as when used in a film, a video game, an advert, or online concert. This is usually paid to the rights holder in the form of a one-off fee, and that additional right is additional to the performing and mechanical rights that you might receive, depending on the context in which your music is performed. So these rights are not actually licensed by PRS for music, and they are instead licensed by the copyright holder directly. In most cases, this will be the composer or the songwriter, or if you were published, then your publisher would license them on your behalf. If you're a self-published composer or songwriter, it's really important to know that these rights belong to you, and that the next time someone asks you to use your music in any of these contexts, then you're entitled to negotiate the terms by which your music is used, which of course includes requesting a fee. So how does PRS for music work in practice from the perspective of a composer or a songwriter? Firstly, composers and songwriters join PRS for music as members. There's an initial one-off fee of £100, which grants you lifetime membership. If you also want to join MCPS, there's a separate one-off fee of £100, which again grants lifetime membership. Later on, we're going to look at the joining process for PRS and MCPS. When you join PRS for music, you assign your rights to us, and we then administer them on your behalf. The first step when joining PRS for music is to register your works with us. This is done via our website, and I'm going to walk you through the entire process in the next webinar of this series on the 27th of January. So if you're interested in learning how to register your works with us, then please do tune in for that. At the same time as when you're registering your works, PRS for music issues licenses to our customers. And of course, we have existing licenses in place as well. Our customers then provide us with usage data, such as what compositions were used, how long they were used for, and in what context they were performed. For example, in a concert or via a radio broadcast. This usage data is then matched to compositions registered in our database, which is made up of the works our members register. Royalties are then calculated based on a variety of PRS tariffs and licenses before being distributed to our members in 4 main quarterly distributions throughout the year. And these occur in April, July, October, and December. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see a couple of interesting figures regarding the royalties we process and pay out. So in 2020, we paid out 669.4 million to our members, processing 22.4 trillion music usages in order to do that. So it just underlines the amount of data that we're processing in order to pay out royalties to our members. So where does the money actually come from? PRS licenses a variety of income sources, and these can broadly be separated into 4 categories. These are public performance, broadcast, online, and international. The percentages you see on screen are a breakdown of our 2020 figures. As you can see, the largest income group in our 2020 distributions was international payments, which included all the money we received from overseas societies. This accounted for 38% of the royalties we paid out. Online is an expanding area of music licensing, and in 2020, it accounted for 29% of the royalties we paid out to our members. It's worth noting that the 2020 figures are indeed impacted by the pandemic, or were impacted by the pandemic. So there are slight differences perhaps to the norm. For example, we would usually expect public performance to be a little bit higher, but of course there were fewer live performances in 2020 due to the restrictions that were in place. So I'd now like to give you some more detail about each of these income types and what comes under them, and also how they are licensed. Public performance income, as you might imagine, includes music being played live in concerts or in pubs and clubs in smaller venues. It also includes festivals. Public performance will also include non-featured recorded music, which is played in business premises. Those might include hotels, restaurants, shops, cinemas, and industrial premises. We license over 300,000 business premises, which includes the likes of 90,000 shops, 40,000 pubs, and even over 100 airports. So if you hear music being played in an airport, that will need a PRS for music license. The body that actually organizes the licensing of public performance is a joint venture, which was set up with our partner PPL, which is the Royalty Collection Society for record labels and performers on sound recordings. So this joint venture is called PPL PRS Limited. And the aim of PPL PRS is to provide a streamlined music licensing service with a single point of contact for the customer. Prior to PPL PRS being founded in 2018, customers had to seek licenses from PRS and PPL separately. So this makes everything much simpler and much easier for the customer. And the benefit is that we're able to negotiate more licenses, which in turn means more revenue for our members. In the next webinar on the 27th of January, we're also going to look at some of the rates and tariffs we apply for public performance. So please do tune in for that, and I'll give you some specific information on the exact tariffs we use. When it comes to broadcast, we license hundreds of TV channels, radio stations, and production companies, ranging from major broadcasters such as the BBC to small community radio stations. An interesting and increasingly expanding area of licensing is online. So we license digital services of all types, which include streaming platforms, video on demand services, online live concerts, and music downloads. PRS licenses audiovisual services and UK only services using a set of bespoke licenses and tariffs. For example, we have a license called the Limited Online Music License, and this is a license for small digital services that offer on-demand streaming and permanent downloads. We also offer a general entertainment online license for medium to large online services, which make general entertainment content available in the UK, such as TV programs. They contain music, but are not a pure music service. So that's why that's called a general entertainment online license. And such an example of a customer would be Netflix. So that's audiovisual and UK only services. There's another area of online licensing, which we call multi-territory online licensing. So digital service providers operating on a multi-territory basis are licensed by another joint venture initiative. This one's called ICE. ICE was created by PRS for Music and the Swedish and German Royalty Collection Societies, STIM and GAMER. And the whole point is to respond to the evolution of the digital marketplace and the birth of cross-border music services. So ICE is a music copyright licensing and processing hub, which basically makes it simpler for digital service providers to obtain multi-territory licenses. And what ICE does is basically negotiate a license with the service directly, which means that we don't have to go through overseas societies when your music is played in those territories. We can speak directly to the service provider. So it's useful to know ICE and PPL, PRS, as they might come up in conversations that you have with our member services team if you become a member of PRS. Another important aspect of our work relates to international royalties. So PRS music licenses customers based in the UK, but you might ask, what if your music is actually performed or broadcast internationally? The answer is that we have reciprocal agreements with over 120 overseas societies who collect monies on our behalf. And these societies have their own distribution rules, which dictate how much royalty is passed on to us. These are paid in our quarterly distributions alongside other royalties. And as you can see, they make up a considerable portion of our distributions, which really kind of underlines the popularity of our members' music worldwide. So now that we've discussed some of the main areas of licensing, I'd now like to introduce some key concepts regarding distribution. As mentioned earlier, we pay out royalties to our members in batches called distributions throughout the year. These are in April, July, October, and in December. By working to standard distribution cycles, we can be as fair, accurate, and transparent, and also cost-effective as possible. It gives us the time that we need to collect revenues, process music usage data, allocate royalties to specific musical works, and then pay these out in a distribution. In the vast majority of cases, revenues related to performances in one quarter are paid out in royalties 2 quarters later. For example, if your music was performed in January, February, or March, these would usually be paid in our July distribution. This is just a very general idea, and the amount of time between music being performed and royalties being paid out can vary depending on the usage. For a comprehensive list of usages and expected turnaround times, please look for our distribution policy on our website. But like I say, on average, we're looking at 2 quarters after the usage. To ensure that distributions are cost effective, we also set a minimum payment threshold for our 4 main distributions. This threshold is £30 for members in the UK. So if the member has a royalty total below this threshold, then we just hold on to the payment until that threshold is met. So if you're a new member of PRS and perhaps you're waiting on royalties, this might be one of the reasons why you might not have been paid yet. One exception is that for 1 distribution a year, we reduce this threshold down to £1, and this is usually in October. So we base our distributions on a number of different methods, depending on the nature of the reporting we receive from our customers. To give you a couple of contrasting examples, a live concert venue will be able to tell PRS the exact repertoire performed at a concert. This will be available from the artists in the form of a set list or program. On the other hand, a pub which plays recorded music in the background will not have the same capacity to tell PRS about every song which was played. So in that case, we need to apply different approaches depending on the reporting we receive from our customers. And there are 3 main methods that we apply in order to do this. These are called census, sample, and analogy. When we distribute royalties on a census basis, that means that we can process data and pay out royalties for every single performance. So this is something often referred to as pay per play. Examples of music usages distributed on a census basis would include things like performances at concert venues, gigs in pubs and clubs. In the case of performances at concert venues, the venue or promoter would actually provide PRS with a set list or program for the event. For concerts at smaller venues or gigs in pubs and clubs, PRS has actually developed a live reporting tool which enables members to submit set lists to us. therefore enabling census-based distribution. So in the next webinar of the series, we're going to look at that tool. So if that's something that you think you might use, if your music's being played in pubs, clubs, and smaller venues, then definitely tune in and I'll walk you through the entire process. So census distribution is our preferred distribution method. It means that royalties can be paid out in the most accurate way possible. But where census distribution is not feasible, we seek to collect a representative sample of actual performances, and that's used as the basis to distribute royalties. And this is referred to as a sample distribution. So this method is really effective when music usage is repetitive, or if there's a small breadth of total repertoire used. It's also effective when we can collect statistically relevant information or sample in an accurate or cost-effective way. So to give you an example of where a sample distribution method might be used, we're looking at a radio station which may play the same songs over and over, or even the TV program which would have the rights to a certain number of programs, a TV channel which has the rights to a certain number of programs. So we can roughly predict what music is going to be played at any given time. When it comes to analogy, an analogy-based payment is used for any distribution section where we can't do census or sample. And this is usually because sufficient data is not readily available. The analogy method uses a similar or analogous data set as the basis for revenue distribution. So analogy is most frequently used for general public performance of non-featured recorded music, such as when played in pubs, restaurants, and cafes as background music. As you might imagine, your cafe on the corner does not have the same ability to report to PRS every single song that they play. So we create an analogy based on real-world data and pay out royalties according to that analogy. I'd now like to look at some example music usages so you can see exactly what royalties would be generated depending on the performance. All of these examples here are kind of geared around £100, and that's because we always say to prospective members, we only recommend joining when you're going to recoup that initial £100 joining fee. And we estimate that you should think about joining when you recoup that £100 over the course of a year. So live concerts are actually invoiced as a percentage of gross box office receipts, and the income is divided among the number of copyrights in any given program. So the example I have here is a 30-minute piece in a 100-minute concert with 500 tickets selling at £15 a ticket. This is kind of a classical example, but it can be transferred to pop quite easily. If you imagine a concert where there's 100 minutes of music and you might have a set lasting 30 minutes. So this example would generate approximately £100 in royalties. Moving on to gigs in clubs and small venues, there's a set royalty fee for this amount, which is approximately £10 per gig. Moving on, the amount of royalties generated for TV and radio depends on the annual revenue received from each channel, the amount of music being played on each channel for the year, and the length of time your work is actually used for. For broadcast distributions, we also factor in the concept of time of day weightings to reflect the likely size of the audience when a performance of music takes place. We currently recognize 3 time bands: high peak, low peak, and non-peak. So 2 examples on the screen relate to a television broadcast on the BBC One network and a radio broadcast via BBC Radio 3. As you can see, approximately 2 minutes of music played at the high peak time on BBC One would generate approximately £100 in royalties. And if your music was performed at a non-peak time, you would receive fewer royalties, and it would take approximately 3 minutes to generate that royalty payment of £100. In terms of BBC Radio 3, 7 minutes of music performed at a high peak time would generate approximately £100, and 21 minutes of music performed at non-peak time would generate £100. So that example is BBC Radio 3. You could translate this to BBC Radio 1 or any other radio station. But how much royalty very much depends on the audience size. So I hope this gives you more of an idea as to the royalties you would be entitled to if your music was performed in these contexts. A useful thing to note for writers of classical music is that where your music is performed in conjunction with non-copyright composers, such as Bach or Beethoven, you will receive a greater share of the royalties relative to if your works were performed alongside other copyright repertoire. And the same goes if you're performing folk songs, for example. So Bach and Beethoven wouldn't usually receive those royalties, so you would receive them instead for that concert. So that's why that is. So finally, the process for joining PRS for music. If you're a composer or a songwriter and your music is being performed live, broadcast on radio or TV, or made available online, then you could be earning performance royalties from PRS for music for the use of your music. You can join online via that link at the bottom of the screen, prsformusic.com/join. Like I say, there's a one-off fee of £100. And when you're a member, you can access the members area of our website where you can register your works and report performances. If your music is being recorded and made available to the public via physical products and also broadcast or online, you could be earning mechanical royalties from MCPS. Now, this is also a one-off fee of £100, and you can also join via the PRS website using the same link. When it comes to joining PRS or MCPS, some composers or songwriters choose not to join MCPS, particularly if they have a publishing contract. And this is because a publishing company would usually collect your mechanical royalties on your behalf. So in that case, they would collect them for you, and depending on your publishing agreement, they may pay a certain portion of them onto you. So that's worth bearing in mind with regards MCPS if you're thinking of working with a publisher, or indeed if you work with one already. So that in a nutshell is copyright royalties and PRS for music. I'm conscious that we've covered a lot of ground there, and people may have questions relating from anything to copyright to specifics on PRS. So perhaps now we can look at the chat and run through some questions.
Lovely, thank you very much. Thanks, that was really clear, and we had lots of information there, so thank you. I think we do have quite a few questions, but if anyone can think of anything, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll attempt to answer as many of them as possible. So starting with the first, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just reading some of the questions. Hi, will we have access to the slides afterwards? Yes, I can circulate those. And you mentioned earlier, Maria, that they'll be actually online on the ISM website.
Yes, so the recording will be available hopefully from tomorrow. And yes, we can add the slides as well. So one of the first questions is, I understand copyright is automatic in the UK, but do composers have to register copyright in the US or anywhere else internationally?
Copyright law should be consistent in that regard. I couldn't say worldwide, but in terms of the US, I know that copyright is considered to be granted automatically in the same way. Okay.
Perfect. The next one is, you mentioned the 70 years since the composer's death rule. Is that Europe only or worldwide?
So this is particularly looking at UK only. So that definition there is set out in the Copyright Designs and Patents Act of 1988. Every country has their own rules with regards to copyright law. So it will differ from country to country. And there are also interesting aspects of copyright where there may be extensions, for example. So some countries such as France may actually grant extensions for composers that served in the war. That comes into play. But what we've covered today is UK copyright law.
Perfect, thank you. Someone says, I'm based in Germany, but my band works with BMI and Sound Exchange. As my distributor collects the royalties of streaming platforms such as Spotify, am I covered for radio and TV as well?
So, sorry, you're a member of BMI?
Sorry, the band, they are based in Germany, but the band works with BMI and Sound Exchange. As my distributor collects the royalties from streaming platforms such as Spotify, are they covered for radio and TV as well?
You would need to be a member of a royalty collection society in order to receive those royalties. So you say your band is a member of BMI, presumably you would need to be a member and register your works with them for you to be covered for those broadcast opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. This has been incredibly useful. Thank you very much. Glad to hear that. I was wondering about copyright and royalty collection on social media, so content creation platforms such as TikTok or Instagram. If someone is lucky enough for a soundbite of their work to go viral, what happens then?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and an area which is ever expanding. So PRS would have licenses in place with those platforms, whether it was Facebook, whether it was TikTok. And the section of the presentation which would be relevant here is that part I mentioned on ICE, and we would have a specific licensing agreement in place with them. Whether or not we distribute royalties based on a census basis, which is pay per play, or an analogy, very much depends on whether those platforms can report to us in that level of detail. But yeah, if your music is being used on those platforms, then we would expect royalties to be flowing to you. And yeah, for those people whose music is used in TikTok, then yeah, obviously the amount of listens there would increase the amount of royalty you receive.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Would you recommend joining PRS if you're just about to launch your career as a composer or songwriter? If we don't join PRS, how do we recoup money in the early career?
Yeah, so like I say, I would bear in mind that initial £100 joining fee. And yeah, there was some examples on the slide there of usages that, examples that might get you that £100. In terms of in the early career, how would you start to earn money as a composer? There are a variety of different routes, and royalties are just one of them. I would, of course, recommend joining PRS for Music to start earning royalties, provided you are having enough performances to justify recouping that initial £100. Mm-hmm. But other kind of income methods include commission fees, for example, and all the other fees that you might receive working as a composer. I know lots of composers that I work with and that I know do all kinds of work on the side, whether that's writing for concerts or, for film and TV, for production companies, or even doing some teaching on the side. So all of those things contribute to helping you in your early stages of your career.
Thank you. Without being a member, how do I make sure I get royalties if I don't know about a particular performance? Is that a reason for joining?
Yeah, well, you'd need to be a member of a royalty collection society in order to collect royalties. And yeah, when your music is performed, particularly in concert venues, that would mean that the concert venues actually report performances to PRS. I know for some composers, there can be instances where your work's performed, but you might not know about it. I've personally had that experience myself. And yeah, so it would definitely make sure that you knew about those performances, because royalties would flow their way to you.
Perfect, thank you. If I'm already a member of BMI, can I also be a member of PRS? Yeah,
you absolutely can. I saw another question on this relating to Coda in Denmark. Mm-hmm. You can be a member of different royalty collection societies at once, but which territories they represent you in might change. So what I say to people is I recommend that you join the collection society which is resident in the country where most of your work is being performed. So, for example, if you were a member of BMI and your music was being performed lots in the States, but you wanted representation for the rest of the world, you could absolutely join PRS for music as well, and they would represent you for the rest of the world. So you can basically mandate royalty collection societies for certain territories.
Perfect. And I think there's another one from someone in the chat saying they're registered with AKM in Austria, but they are living and working mostly in the UK. Would it make sense to change to PRS?
Yeah, what I would say again is if your work is primarily being performed in the UK, what that would mean for you is that it would take less time, in theory, for the royalties to flow to you. I mentioned our reciprocal agreements with international societies earlier. You imagine there's an extra step there from collecting money from the performance. They actually have to transfer that money to another collection society, and there's another round of data processing. So if you join in the country where your music is being performed the most, that will ensure kind of more timely royalty payments. As for your specific example, I couldn't say what I'd recommend. You can definitely look into changing to PRS or nominating PRS to represent you for the rest of the world.
Great. Can you register previous live performances undertaken before joining PRS?
Unfortunately, you can't do that. You can only claim for performances which occurred when you were a member. We do, however, have two effective membership dates. So when you join PRS, depending on what month, you'll be considered to join either in January, or I think the other month is June or July. I can't remember which. So there is some scope there to kind of report previous performances, but only for that short window immediately after joining. Generally speaking, we can only represent your repertoire for the time you're a member of us. So before you remember, unfortunately, we didn't represent your catalogue and you wouldn't be able to receive performances prior to that date.
Okay. Where do you sign up if you want to start releasing music online?
Presumably as a composer.
Yeah,
or
singer-songwriter, something maybe.
You can also sign up to PRS as a customer, as a licensee. This is the same place, so go on to prsformusic.com, and if you go to the top right-hand corner of the website, there's a green button to sign up or to log in, and that's where to go.
There's another question, which I feel like we might have answered it. When something is out of copyright, is it completely free to use anywhere? And I think you mentioned that the out of copyright rules differ according to country. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a really important point that you mentioned. So the example that I gave earlier was UK. If something's considered public domain in the UK, that doesn't mean necessarily that it's public domain for the rest of the world, because some royalties may have, or some countries may have a 90-year period, some may have a 50-year period. So it's important to check the specifics for where music is being performed. For composers that, were kind of deceased a long time ago, so the examples I gave were Beethoven and Bach, they're, undisputed to be public domain around the world. There isn't a country that grants 400 years protection.
Okay, great. We have a question regarding the synchronization rights, for example. You said the fees should go to the composer directly and the composer should ask for the fee directly. How much should we ask for?
That's a really good question. I'm afraid the answer is sort of how long is a piece of string. Basically, you need to weigh up all of the details relating to that usage. So you can imagine a synchronization where your music's used for a local concert would be completely different to a synchronization onto a global film. What I would recommend doing is looking on the ISM website, and they have some resources called a composer's pack and a self-publishing pack. There's some guidance there, and also check out the Musicians Union, and they'll have some examples on what rates you might apply. But I'm afraid there's no hard and fast rule as to how much you should be looking to charge for. It very much depends on the budget of the people you're working with when it comes to sync. So I get asked that question a lot in my job. When it comes to production music, there is more of an understanding, and we actually have a production music rate card on our website. So if you maybe search for that in Google, that might give you some examples as well.
Okay, great. Got lots of questions, so I apologize in advance if we don't get to answer all of them, but I can, after we finish the webinar, I can send most of your questions to Daniel, and we'll hopefully we'll be able to answer answer them if we don't cover them in the live webinar. So do you need to register for PPL separately as well as included with PRS? I'm pretty sure we mentioned that in the webinar.
Yeah, I briefly touched upon PPL. PPL is the Royalty Collection Society relating to sound recordings. So people who would join PPL would be record labels, also self-releasing artists that own their own recordings, and performers on sound recordings. But if you're a singer-songwriter and you might record your music in a local studio or at home, then you would probably own your sound recording rights. So you might also consider joining PPL to receive royalties on that side. And when you would receive royalties would be when that recording is used. So PRS is very much the composition, and PPL is the recording of that composition.
And you said there is the combined application for both of them.
Yeah, there's the joint venture called PPL PRS. Basically, that's the face of how we license, in particular, business premises. So yeah, before we teamed up together, they had to get a separate PRS license and a separate PPL license, which, as you can imagine, is probably quite confusing from the point of view of someone who runs a business. So that just makes it easier for them to get a license.
Okay, great. Do PRS have plans or advice in place for royalty distribution for sound engineers and producers, or is this at the discretion of the artist whose music they're producing?
I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. It may be relating to, if it relates to, I guess, royalty splits for producers.
I guess so. So if I'm guessing sound engineers would want royalties, or if that is something that the artist that they are, assisting and producing, if the artist will give them some royalties.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would definitely recommend checking out those resources on ISM and the Musicians Union for specific guidance on that. PRS doesn't publish any recommendations for royalty splits. That's very much up to the contributors to negotiate between themselves. So yeah, I don't think we actually, publish guidance on that front.
Okay. So let's see, another one that's 3-part, so bear with. Does a classical music concert that was streamed due to COVID and made available for a certain amount of time count in the same way as if it was live? Yeah,
that's a really good question, and the answer may be a bit longer with this one. So this relates to a license that we now have called an online live concerts license, and we would license that basically as if it was performed live. So we would expect royalties to flow to musicians in the same way. However, due to the coronavirus pandemic, we understood that the difficulties that venues were facing, and we made a decision not to kind of go and negotiate licenses to them over a certain period. So prior to the end of January 2021, we were not seeking licenses for those online concerts as a way to support the live industry during the pandemic. So if your work was performed before that time, there's a chance that the license was not in place. Although if it's a particularly high value usage, then there may be a license in place for that. But moving forward, an online live concert would be licensed, and there wouldn't be any difference from you as a composer in terms of getting royalties. We aim to pay you royalties for those usages in the same way as a live performance.
Okay. I'll cover some of the other questions. I know this was a threefold question, but I'm hoping we'll cover that after the webinar. Does PRS collect royalties from platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube, or is it the platform's responsibility to pay you for the very stream/views of your music?
Yeah, we have licenses in place with all of these platforms. Again, the section of the presentation which would be relevant was the bit where I mentioned ICE, which is our joint venture with STIM and Gamer, which are royalty collection societies in Sweden and Germany. And what we do is through ICE, license those multi-territory online digital service providers, such as Spotify, Apple Music directly. And yeah, royalties are paid out then. We receive usage data from them and pay out royalties based on how much of your music was used.
Perfect, thank you. And last question is, you mentioned broadcasting peak times and non-peak times, and how does this relate to on-demand viewing or listening?
Yeah, the on-demand viewing and listening would be separate. So those bands, high peak, low peak, and non-peak, we're talking about terrestrial TV, we're talking about kind of traditional radio broadcasting, and the streaming providers are kind of licensed in a different way. Think of that as online as opposed to broadcast.
Great, thank you. Well, as I said, we still have some questions, but we'll answer them afterwards. So we'll make a note and we'll get back to the attendees who've sent some questions. If you've sent them anonymously, you can email membership@ism.org and we'll forward them to Daniel and put you in contact. So thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel. Sorry for the influx of questions.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. Thanks everybody for your questions, and sorry we didn't go through all of them. But I'm happy to take this off screen and get you the answers. So yeah, thanks again for listening.
We'll also be able to cover some of them next week as well, so please tune in for that. The webinar, as I mentioned at the beginning, will be available on the ISM Trust website, hopefully from tomorrow, if not the day after. That is ismtrust.org/webinars. And there you can find a wide range of webinars available to view on demand, along with other resources that support the sector, which are all free. And you can visit that on ismtrust.org. Our next webinar in the series will be, as Daniel mentioned, Thursday, the 27th of January, also at 2 p.m. And we'll look more in depth at the benefits of becoming a PRS member. So lastly, it just leaves me to say thank you again for attending. Thank you to Daniel. We hope to see you next week or at another ISM Trust webinar soon. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.